time, I see. Delighted in having the pleasure of receiving you here at Longbourn. The Bennets of Longbourn, eh? Pray, allow me to make you acquainted with my daughters. Miss Jane Bennet.
The eldest. Though I cannot see why she must always have the chair nearest the window.
Hush, Lydia, and prettiest of all.
Mary, for goodness sake.
The next, Elizabeth.
Wittiest of all.
Though Captain Tally of the regiment expressed her to be the most critical young lady in Hertfordshire.
And the only complete sentence I ever heard him construct.
Law.
And, wittiest of all, Mary.
The proudest. Pride relates more to our opinion of ourselves, vanity to what others think of us.
Aye.
Pride is a very common failing, I believe. By all I have read, I am convinced it is very common indeed.
And?
Pride and vanity are very different things, even though the words are often used synonymously. A person may be proud without being vain.
Quite so. And the two youngest, Kitty and Lydia.
Are we to be only the youngest? Have we no other qualities?
We are the best dancers with the prettiest hats.
And sing most charmingly. Well, I do.
Mr. Bennet!
Mrs. Bennet, to be sure.
Mr. Bennet, have you heard that Liverpool Park has been let at last?
I have not.
Oh, but it has. Mrs. Long has just been there. Probably an elderly bachelor with a King Charles Spaniel. But do you not want to know who has taken it?
You want to tell me, and I have no objection in hearing it.
Mrs. Long says it's a young man of large fortune.
Really?
Married or single?
We might first inquire of the gentleman's name, Lydia.
Bingley. What? Married or single? He's a single man of large fortune.
It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. However little known the feelings of such a man may be, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered the rightful property of someone or others of their daughters.
Oh dear. Hush, Lizzie. What a fine thing for our girls.
How so?
That he might marry one of us, Papa.
And that is his design in staying here.
Design? Nonsense! But is it not unusual that a young man may fall in love?
Though he must be a soldier in a regimental jacket.
You must visit him as soon as he comes.
I see no occasion for that. You girls may go.
Oh, but you must, for it will be impossible for us to visit him if you do not.
I will send a few lines by you assuring him of my hearty consent of him marrying whichever he chooses.
Oh, Mr. Bennet, you have no compassion on my poor nerves.
But my dear, I have a high respect for your nerves. They are my old friends.
Oh, you do not know what I suffer.
But I do hope you will live to see many a young man move into the neighborhood.
It will be of no use to us since you will not visit them.
Despite his protestations, Papa was among the earliest of those who waited on Mr. Bingley.
Capital, Lydia. I do hope Bingley will like it.
We are in no way to know what Mr. Bingley likes since you are not to visit.
It isn't fair, Papa.
Really, it isn't. You forget that Mrs. Long has promised to introduce him.
I do not see Mrs. Long doing any such thing. She has two nieces of her own.
And plain as cake.
She is
Both
a
of
selfish, hypocritical woman. I have no opinion of her.
But pray, let us return to Mr. Bingley.
And I say I am sick of Mr. Bingley.
Well, my dear, if I would have known as much this morning, I certainly would not have called on him.
Called on him? Oh, Papa! Truly, Father?
Now see what a most excellent father you have, girls.
Yes. Now I fear that I've actually paid him the visit. There's no escaping his acquaintance now.
standing about by yourself in this stupid manner. You had much better dance.
You know how I detest it unless I'm particularly acquainted with my partner. Your sister is engaged, and there's not another woman in the room whom it would not be a punishment to me to stand up with.
I have never met more pleasant girls in all my life, and several uncommonly pretty.
Your partner, the eldest Miss Bennet, is the only handsome woman in the room.
Indeed, the most beautiful creature I've ever beheld. But there's one of her sisters, whom I dare say is very agreeable. Allow me to ask my partner to introduce you.
She is tolerable, but that is insufficient to tempt me. Pray, return to your partner. You're wasting your time with me.
Mr. Bingley, what a most excellent ball we have indeed. Jane is so admired, and Mr. Bingley has danced with her twice. And the third, he turned to Miss Lucas, and the fourth, Miss King, and the fifth, Jane again, and the sixth...
If he had any compassion towards me, he would not have danced half as much.
Well, he is just what a young man ought to be. Sensible, lively, good-humored, and I never saw such happy manners.
He is also handsome.
I cannot express to you the shocking rudeness of Mr. Darcy.
Then how wise of you not to try, my love.
I was very much flattered by his asking me to dance a second time. I did not expect such a compliment.
Did not you? Oh, compliments always take you by surprise.
I can assure you Lizzie loses nothing in not suiting Mr. Darcy's fancy. He is a horrid, disagreeable man.
You never see a fault in anyone, Jane.
I would not wish to be too hasty in censoring anyone.
He is so conceited, there is no enjoying him. Lizzie not handsome enough to dance with. I quite detest the man.
I always do what I think.
With your good sense, to be so honestly blind to the nonsense and follies of others.
Miss Bennet, why should you consider a stroll about?
Particularly intimate.
Sir William Lucas had made a tolerable fortune and had risen to the honor of knighthood.
And gives 2 balls a season.
Lady Lucas was a very good woman and not too clever, which I find restful.
And their daughter Charlotte is my particular friend.
Truly and simply balls paradise to me.
Occupied as you are in observing Mr. Bingley's attentions to your sister, I think that you yourself do not suspect that you have become, shall I say, an object of interest?
Indeed, where?
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, all to my hearth and home. What more fine amusement than a dance for young people, eh? I consider it one of the first refinements of polished society.
Any savage can dance, sir.
Wit, sir, wit indeed.
Do you not notice that Mr. Darcy always seems on the fringes of your conversation?
Mrs. Long told me last night that he sat near her for nearly half an hour without opening his lips.
Miss Bingley told me that he never says much unless amongst his intimates.
You waste the ball on idle chatter. Note him.
He has an extremely critical eye. Did you not think, Mr. Darcy, that I expressed myself uncommonly well just now as I teased Colonel Forster into giving us a ball at Meryton?
Indeed, but it's a subject which always makes a lady energetic.
My dear Eliza, why are you not dancing? Mr. Darcy, you cannot refuse to dance in such a tedious employment.
Indeed, sir, I have no intention of dancing. I entreat you not to suppose that I came this way in order to beg for our partner.
May I have your hand for the next, Miss Bennet?
Mr. Darcy is all politeness, but I must deny myself the pleasure.
Miss Bingley?
Mrs. Darcy, I can guess the subject of your reverie.
I should imagine not.
You are considering how insupportable it would be to pass many evenings in such society. And indeed, I'm quite of your opinion.
I once wore a gown with 12 ribbons and a double rosette.
The insipidity, the noise, the nothingness, and yet the self-importance of all these people. What I would give to hear your truths on this.
I can assure you, Your conjecture's totally wrong.
Oh,
I've been meditating on the great pleasure a pair of fine eyes on the face of a pretty woman can bestow.
truly. And pray tell what lady has the credit of inspiring such reflections?
Miss Elizabeth Bennet.
I confess I am all astonishment. How long has she been such a favorite? And pray, when am I to wish you joy?
A lady's imagination is very rapid. It jumps from admiration to love to matrimony in a moment.
Nay, I shall consider the matter as absolutely settled.
Oh, indeed, you are a scamp and a rogue, Sir William. You make me laugh.
You will have a most charming mother-in-law indeed.
Oh, Mr. Bennet, you must hear what this mischievous fellow is saying.
And you will have the pleasure of her always being at Kimberley with you.
Miss Bennet, pray forgive the appearance of unwanted attention, but might I request this reel?
Indeed, sir. It's rather an honor than a request.
The honor I believe to be mine.
It seems Jane quite admires Mr. Bingley. Noticeably, I would agree. Bingley likes her sister, undoubtedly, but he may never do more than like her if she doesn't help him on. Well, she helps him on as much as her nature will allow. Remember, Eliza, he does not know Jane's disposition as you do. No, they meet tolerably often, but has never many hours together. Jane should therefore make the most of every moment she can command his attention. She takes time, I think, to study his character. Well, I wish her success with all my heart, and if she married him tomorrow, I should think that she had as good a chance of happiness as if she had studied his character for a 12-month. It is better to know as little as possible of the defects of a person than you are to spend your life. Oh, Charlotte, you make me laugh. You are being watched. Soon enough, back at Longbourn, Jane found herself in receipt of an invitation from...
My dearest friend, if you are not so compassionate as to dine today with me,
We shall be in danger of hating each other for the rest of our lives. Come as soon as you can on receipt of this. We shall dine with my brother, as well as other gentlemen and sundry officers.
yours ever,
Caroline Bingley. With the officers! May Kitty and I go as well, Mama?
We should like to meet these sundry officers.
There was but one name on the invitation.
may I have the carriage, father?
Of course.
Nonsense! Jane, go on horseback, for the weather looks ill, and you may have the good fortune of getting thoroughly soaked and have to stay longer with the Bingleys in ill health.
Mamma's hopes were answered. Jane had not been gone long when it began to rain torrents.
What a lucky idea of mine, indeed.
Are you Lizzie? Oh, Liz from Netherfield, I think. My dearest Lizzie.
I find myself to be very unwell this morning, which is to be imputed by my getting wet from yesterday. The Bingleys will not hear of my returning home till I'm better.
Yours, Jane.
Well, my dear, if your daughter should die, let it be a comfort to know it was all in pursuit of Mr. Bingley and under your orders.
Nonsense! No one dies of little trifling gold. And the inconvenience, Mr. Bennet, is worth the price.
Jane is ill, and I will go to her.
Is this a hint from me, Lizzie, to send for the horses?
Oh, no, Papa. The horses are wanted on the farm. I will walk. The distance is nothing. Only 3 miles.
You cannot go jumping over stiles and arrive in dirty stockings.
Jane, at least, will forgive me, Mother.
Mr. Bennet!
Ah, Miss Elizabeth, a pleasure. How remarkably good of you to come.
Mr. Bingley, a pleasure, of course.
Of course, Miss Bennet has slept ill, and though Up is not well enough to leave her room, I will take you to her.
Lizzie!
Jane, you are flushed.
Miss Elizabeth, I'd be most grateful if you remain in Netherfield until your sister is quite well.
Yes, do stay.
I will dispatch a servant to acquaint your family and return with any necessities.
Mr. Bingley, I cannot attempt to thank you.
Believe me, I have no pleasure in the world superior to that of contributing to yours.
Well,
He is most attentive.
indeed he is.
Lizzie, how did you get here?
I walked.
Through the mud.
Through the mud, yes.
To walk 3 miles, or 4 miles, or 5 miles?
Whatever it is, through the mud, up to our ankles and quite alone, seems to me to show an abominable sort of conceited independence and complete indifference to decorum.
It shows an affection for her sister that is very pleasing.
I have an excessive regard for Jane Bennet, and I wish her well settled. But with such a father and mother, and such low connections, their uncle is an attorney in Meryton, and the other lives somewhere near Cheapside.
If they had uncles enough to fill all of Cheapside, it would not make them one jot less agreeable. Oh, Miss Elizabeth, a pleasure. Your sister improves, I hope.
She is resting, but she hopes not to be thought unsociable.
Indeed not. I find it singular and intriguing that you prefer reading to cards, Miss Bennet.
Miss Elizabeth Bennet despises cards. She is a great reader with little pleasure in anything else.
Indeed, I deserve neither such praise nor such censure, for I am not a great reader, and I take pleasure in many things.
In nursing your sister, you take great pleasure, I'm sure.
Hear, hear.
Is Miss Darcy grown much since the spring? Oh, how I long to see your charming sister again. So accomplished and such manners for her age.
It is amazing to me how young ladies can have the patience to be so very accomplished, as they all are.
All? My dear Charles, what do you mean?
Yes, Caroline, all. I have never heard a young lady spoken of for the first time without hearing that she was very accomplished.
I fear I cannot boast of knowing more than half a dozen in the whole range of my acquaintance who are really accomplished.
You must comprehend a great idea of your idea of an accomplished woman.
She must have a thorough knowledge of music, singing, drawing, dancing, languages, and a certain something in her air and manner. In the tone of her voice, her address and expressions, or the words will be but half deserved.
And to all this, she must yet add something to the improvement of her mind by extensive reading.
I am no longer surprised at your knowing only 6 accomplished women. I am now wondering at your knowing any at all.
I say, sister, might you take the pianoforte and favor us with a lively Scotch air?
Splendid. And then Miss Bennet will seize the opportunity to show us a fling. What you were saying, Miss Bennet?
I've heard you before. I knew you wanted me to say yes, so that you might despise my good taste. But I always take pleasure in cheating a person of their premeditated contempt. Therefore, I have made up my mind to say that I do not want to dance a reel at all. Now, despise me if you dare.
Oh, very sorry, Darcy.
And is Mr. Darcy not to be laughed at?
The wisest and best of men may be rendered ridiculous by persons whose first object in life is a joke.
I hope I never ridicule what is wise and good. But nonsense and follies, whims and inconsistencies do divert me, I own, and I laugh at them whenever I can.
It's been the study of my life to avoid such weaknesses which often expose a great understanding to ridicule.
Such as vanity and pride?
Yes, vanity is a weakness, but pride, where there's a real superiority of mind, pride will always be under good regulation. I have faults enough. My temper I dare not vouch for. It is perhaps too little yielding and a bit resentful. My good opinion, once lost, is lost forever.
That is a failing indeed.
There is, I believe, in every disposition, some natural tendency to disorder.
And your defect is the propensity to hate everybody.
And yours is to willfully misunderstand them.
On Sunday, the carriage was sent, and Jane and Elizabeth returned home. Mamma, I fear, was not very cordial to them.
I cannot for the life of me see, Elizabeth, why you had to rush Jane home.
I wasn't rushed, Mamma.
Well, I, for one, am gratified. Our evening conversations had lost much of its animation.
Mr. Bennet.
Oh, pooh.
My dear, I do hope you've ordered a good dinner for tonight's family party, for I am expecting a guest.
Is it Mr. Bingley?
It is not Mr. Bingley.
Oh.
It is Mr. Collins, who, when I am dead, may throw you all out of the house whenever he sees fit.
Why, Papa?
Grandpa.
It is the entail, Kitty. The entail in which I often remind you that my inheritance is limited to male heirs. And I, having produced none, Mr. Collins has become the legal recipient. Now,
Pray do not speak of that odious man in this odious legality. It is monstrous enough that your estate should be entailed away from your own children.
Mr. Collins was punctual to his time.
Ah, Mrs. Bennet. Mr. Bennet. As a pastor of the Church of England, I take pride that my present overtures of goodwill are highly commendable, and that the circumstances of my being the next in the entail of the Longbourn estate will be kindly overlooked on your part. As for your daughters, I have heard much of their beauty, but in the instance, fame has fallen short of the truth, and I doubt not to be seen them to be well disposed of in marriage.
You are very kind, sir, and I pray with all my heart that it may prove so, for else they will be destitute enough.
I am very sensible, I can assure you, of the hardships of my fair cousins.
Law.
But I can assure the young ladies that I come prepared to admire them. Thus, in conclusion, I may say that having a good house and a good living as a clergyman, I intend to marry. And in reconciliation with your family, I propose to choose from among your daughters.
Indeed.
I very much approve of your eldest.
Jane?
Jane, yes. I conceive her to be both fetching and decorous. She should do quite nicely, and seniority must be served.
Jane. Sir, as for my younger daughters, I cannot take it upon myself but to know of no predispositions. As for my eldest,
Jane?
Jane,
Jane.
I feel it incumbent to say that she is very likely to soon be engaged.
I see. And the next at age?
Elizabeth?
Elizabeth, yes. Very forthright and not at all unpresentable.
Done!
To escape Mr. Collins' lectures,
On high moral quality in the pastorate of the Church of England.
Papa suggested a stroll to Meryton.
for I supposed him better suited for a walker than a talker.
Indeed, one must first learn that the highest governance of a Christian duty.
no sooner had I arrived at the regimental trumpetry than 3 ensigns fell all at once,
And discovered from within, not from without.
and all 3 asked me to walk out with them.
That no man can become a serviceable servant solely by obedience to written edicts and laws elucidated.
La, said I but one young lady who can play his...
When we soon espied
Oh, yoo-hoo!
a newly arrived officer of the regiment,
Yoo-hoo!
who was introduced to us.
By an officer already of our acquaintance as...
Mr. Wickham. His appearance was greatly in his favor.
He had all the best parts of beauty,
A fine countenance,
a good figure,
and very pleasing address.
How do you do? This is a very lucky chance indeed. At the officers' table, the Bennets are often spoken of, and all of it, approbation. Miss Catherine, Miss Lydia, I presume. Wrong way round.
Quite topsy-turvy.
Profoundly sorry. I hope to be correct in addressing you as Miss Elizabeth Bennet.
Yes, quite correct.
La, we were talking oh so very agreeably when the sounds of horses drew our notice.
And Mr. Bingley and Darcy came riding by.
Mr. Wickham had barely touched his hat, which Mr. Darcy barely deigned to return.
What could be the meaning of it? Before walking on, we naturally enjoyed Mr. Wickham to pay us a visit.
With a very great pleasure indeed. I fear we poor souls in the army lack greatly in feminine instruction. Miss Bennet.
Mr. Wickham.
La, but our sister has made a conquest.
Lydia.
Lady Catherine has more than once observed to me. She is the proprietress of Rosings, and of a very, 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 very extensive property. but her daughter's indifferent health has unhappily prevented her from being in town.
Absolutely splendid.
Mr. Wickham has arrived. Mr. George Wickham, Papa. Pleased?
Delighted.
Oh, Parson Collins, Mr. Wickham.
Very great pleasure indeed. I had a near miss myself.
As Mr. Collins once again held forth,
I have more than once observed to Lady Catherine de Bourgh that her daughter seemed to be born a duchess, and the most elevated rank, instead of giving her consequence, may be adorned by... But to be brief...
Mr. Wickham suggested that I show him around the grounds.
Please excuse my temerity in accepting your sister's kind invitation with an almost unbecoming alacrity.
It was a great kindness to seek us out. The regiment, I hope, is not unhappily quartered here?
I cannot speak for the rest of the regiment, but I may say that I am personally bedded in acquaintance with your family.
A courtesy very prettily put.
And sincerely meant.
I could not help but notice a certain coolness of regard pass between yourself and Mr. Darcy.
You have a keen eye, Miss Bennet.
And a curious one, sir.
Might you tell me how far Netherfield is from Meryton?
3 miles, perhaps.
And how long has Mr. Darcy been staying there?
A month. He is a man of very large property in Derbyshire, I understand.
His estate there is a noble one. In fact, I've been connected with his family since infancy. You know Mr. Darcy well.
I spent 3 or 4 days in the same house with him, and I find him to be very disagreeable.
I believe your opinion of him would in general astonish.
Really? He is not at all liked here in Hertfordshire.
Well, I believe the world is perhaps blinded by his fortune and consequence and only sees him as he chooses to be seen.
I should take it on my short opinion, too, that he is a very ill-tempered man.
I fear I have a considerable knowledge of him. The late Mr. Darcy, his father, was excessively attached to me. His son and I were born in the same parish, shared the same amusements. My father was his father's estate manager. The elder Mr. Darcy knew that the church ought to be my profession and promised me the family parish if available. If not, a voluntary promise to provide for me. Both were countermanded by young Darcy upon his father's death.
Oh, but on what grounds?
His father's uncommon attachment to me irritated him. He had not the sort of temper to bear the competition we were in. In short, his behavior to me has been scandalous. But I do not trust myself on the subject. I can hardly be fair to him now.
I had not thought Mr. Darcy as bad as this.
I believe that almost all of his actions can be traced back to his considerable pride.
But can such abominable pride as his ever done him any good?
I must own him to be liberal, generous, display hospitality, assist his tenants, and relieve the poor. Family pride and filial pride have done this to him. His father's attachment to me has pricked his pride and made him my enemy.
I am astonished at his intimacy with Mr. Bingley. Do you know him?
Not at all.
He is a sweet, amiable, gentlemanlike man. He cannot know what Mr. Darcy is.
Mr. Darcy can please where he chooses.
I should take it on my very short opinion that he should be publicly disgraced.
Sometime or other he will be, but it shall not be by me. Miss Bennet, allow me to say that the troubling aspect of our conversation has not made you a whit less delightful.
I must suppose that from the relationships you've just described, you will not allow for your attendance at the upcoming ball at Netherfield?
I would fear discomfort for all involved. But make no mistake, Miss Bennet, I keenly feel the loss.
Well, whatever he said was well said, and whatever he did was done gracefully.
But, dear sister, I am all astonishment and concern. I know not how Mr. Darcy could be so unworthy of Mr. Bingley's regard.
I can much easier believe Mr. Bingley is being imposed on than Mr. Wickham invents such a history of himself.
But it is so distressing. One does not know what to think.
I beg your pardon? One knows exactly what to think.
Well, I know only with certainty that poor Mr. Bingley would have much to suffer if the charge becomes public.
Poor Mr. Bingley?
I speak only as an observer.
The following Monday, Mr. Bingley and his sister came to give their personal invitation to the upcoming ball at Netherfield, which was fixed for the following Tuesday. While Mr. Collins...
I am by no means of the opinion, I can assure you, that a ball of this kind, given by a young man of character, can have any evil intention whatsoever, and I am so far from objecting to dancing myself that I take this opportunity to solicit the first 2 dances with you. Especially.
And it struck me that I had been selected from among my sisters as worthy of being the future mistress of Hunsford Parsonage.
I perceive that Elizabeth still longed to see Mr. Wickham among those assembled, seeking the conquest of all which remained unsubdued of his
I might have titled them Dances of Mortification.
Miss Bennet, may I have your hand for the next?
Well, I hardly think. Do not be a simpleton and allow your fancy for Wickham to make you appear unpleasant in the eyes of a man 10 times his consequence. Now go.
Well then.
The music is well played, do you not think? It's your turn to speak, Mr. Darcy. I commented on the dance. Now you might comment on the size of the room or the number of couples.
I can assure you, everything you wish to be said will be said.
Very well. That shall do for now. You may be silent.
Do you talk by rule when dancing?
I have always found a great similarity in the turn of our minds. We are both of an unsocial, taciturn disposition, and we only speak if we wish to amaze the entire room.
This is no striking resemblance to your own character. How close it is to mine, I can hardly tell.
Did I tell you that I have had the pleasure of forming a new acquaintance with an old friend of yours? Mr. Wickham.
Mr. Wickham is blessed with such happy manners as to make him capable of making friends. How equally capable he is of maintaining them is very unsure.
He has been very unlucky to lose your friendship, in a manner I'm sure he is to suffer from all of his life.
What do you think of books?
I cannot speak of books in a ballroom. I had to speak of something else. You once told me, Mr. Darcy, that you never forgave, and that your resentment once created was unappeasable. You take caution then, I suppose, as to its being created, and never allow yourself to be blinded by prejudice.
May I ask to what these questions tend to?
Merely the illustration of your character. I am trying to make it out.
And what is your success?
I do not get on at all. I find so many different accounts of yours to puzzle me exceedingly.
I can readily believe that accounts of me may vary greatly. I would wish, Miss Bennet, that you would not sketch my character at the present, as there is reason to fear the performance would reflect no credit on either.
Ah, Mr. Darcy, you are, if I am not mistaken, the nephew of my esteemed patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who has secured me a living at the Hunsford Parsonage.
You've neglected your name, sir.
Have I?
You have.
Mr. Collins.
Delighted.
Excellent. Most excellent.
So, Miss Eliza, I hear you're quite delighted with George Wickham. Oh yes, your sister Jane has been talking with me. Did you know he was the son of the late Mr. Darcy's steward?
I believe he's so asserted.
Let me recommend you, however, as a friend, not to give implicit confidence to all his assertions. As to Mr. Darcy's using him ill, it is completely false. For on the contrary, he's always been remarkably kind to him. Well, George Wickham has treated Mr. Darcy in a most infamous manner. do not know the particulars of his coming into the country, but it is the most insolent thing considering his descent.
His guilt and his descent seem by your standards as one and the same. For you have accused him of nothing more than being the son of Mr. Darcy Stewart, which I can assure you, he informed me of himself.
I beg your pardon. Please excuse my interference. It was kindly meant.
Insolent girl!
By heavens, you step it wonderfully.
Under your instructions, sir.
Well, that at least promises a marriage a true affection can bestow.
Oh, Miss Bingley! I cannot enumerate on the advantages of such a match.
Mamma!
And the advantages of living but 3 miles apart. It's such a comfort knowing how fond you are of Jane.
The carriage is waiting.
But...
And we must leave.
Miss Elizabeth, it's a shame we footed it but once.
When at last the guests and officers quitted the house, Mamma spoke all the way home of wedding clothes, preparations, and seeing Jane settled in Netherfield within 3 months. Oh, and Mr. Collins is married to Elizabeth as well.
May I hope, madam, for the interest in the matter of your penultimate eldest, Elizabeth, for I solicit the honor of a private audience with her.
What? Oh, yes, dear me. Yes, certainly. Dear Mr. Collins, I am sure Lizzie can have no objection. A private audience? Come, girls, I want you upstairs.
Please, madam, do not go.
Not go?
Mr. Collins must forgive me, but there is nothing that he cannot say that everyone need not hear. In fact, I'm leaving myself.
Nonsense, Lizzie. I desire you stay where you are. Lizzie, I insist upon you staying and hearing Mr. Collins. Come, girls, stay.
Your modesty adds only to your other perfections, for my attentions are too marked to be mistaken. But before I am run away with my feelings, I must enumerate on my reasons for marrying. First, set an example of matrimony in my parish. Second, it adds greatly to a man's well-being. Thirdly, by particular advice and recommendation by my esteemed patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Let her be an active, useful sort of person, her very words. Your wit and vivacity, I think, will be suitable to her. Fourth, as I am to inherit this estate after the death of your honored father, I feel bound to choose a wife from among his daughters, so as to make the loss to them as little as possible. And now nothing remains for me but to assure you in the most animated violence of the language of my affection. I am well aware of your father's finances, and as to dowry, I am perfectly indifferent. And you can assure yourself, Miss Bennet, that no ungenerous reproach will ever pass my lips when we are married.
Oh, no!
No.
Mr. Collins, I am very sensible as to the honors of your proposals, but it is impossible for me to do anything other than decline them.
Oh! It is usual with young ladies to decline at first the attentions of the man they secretly wish to accept.
I can assure you I am not one of those young ladies. You could not make me happy, and I am convinced I am the last woman in the world who could make you so. Had your friend Lady Catherine de Bourgh known me at all, she would find me very ill-qualified. This matter may be, therefore, considered as finally settled.
Naturally, you cannot be serious in your rejection of me. Good sense and financial necessity forbid it. It is your wish to increase my love by suspense, as is the practice of elegant females.
I am not one of those elegant females hoping to torment a young man. I am a rational creature speaking from my heart. I will not have you. Can I speak clearer?
You are uniformly charming.
Mr. Collins, allow me to be the first to congratulate you.
She has begun delightfully with a refusal.
A refusal?
Out of bashful modesty.
Mr. Bennet, you are wanted immediately! She is a headstrong, foolish girl and does not know her own interest.
Headstrong?
But I will make her know of it.
Foolish? If it were so, it would be better not to force her acceptance, because if liable to such defects of temper, she could not contribute much to my felicity.
Mr. Bennet, you must insist upon Elizabeth marrying Mr. Collins, for she vows she will not have him.
Pray, excuse me.
I have not the pleasure of understanding you.
And now Mr. Collins thinks he will not have Lizzie. Lizzie!
And what am I to do on the occasion?
Why insist upon her marrying him?
Come here, my child. Is it true that Mr. Collins has made you an offer of marriage?
It is.
And this offer you have refused?
Perhaps so.
An unhappy alternative is before you, my child. Your mother will never speak to you again if you do not marry Mr. Collins. And I would never see you again if you did.
Well, Miss Lizzie, go on in this way and you will never get a husband at all. And I'm sure I do not know who is to maintain you once your father is dead. Mr. Collins!
Please excuse me, I wish to withdraw my past pretensions for your daughter's favor. It has come to my attention that her high spirits may not find their perfect expression in the somewhat humbled life of the parsonage. I have certainly meant well, and if my intentions have been in any way reprehensible, I here beg leave to apologize.
Well, Lizzie, I must simply say I shall never speak to you again. I take no pleasure in speaking to undutiful children.
The discussion of Mr. Collins' offer was now nearly at an end, but rather than decamp in disarray, he made it known
That he was always to have gone on Saturday, and to Saturday he still meant to stay.
and
The assiduous attentions paid to Lizzie were transferred.
to Charlotte Lucas, who was visiting.
Her civility in listening to him was
Was
a seasonable relief to us all.
Jane, this has come from Netherfield.
From Netherfield.
Caroline Bingley says their whole party are leaving for town without any intentions of coming back again.
I do not pretend to regret anything I shall leave behind in Hertfordshire, except your society, my dearest friend. It is evident by this that Mr. Bingley comes back no more this winter.
It is only evident that Miss Bingley means he shouldn't.
I will read you the passage which particularly hurts me. Mr. Darcy is impatient to see his younger sister, and to own to the truth, we are scarcely less eager to meet her again. Georgiana has no equal for beauty, elegance, and accomplishments, and we dare entertain the hope of her being hereafter our sister.
Foolishness. She is a child.
Is it not clear enough? Does it not expressly state that Caroline neither expects nor wishes me to be her sister, and that she is perfectly convinced of her brother's indifference to me? Can there be any other opinion on the subject?
Yes, there can. But mine is completely different. Will you hear it?
Most willingly.
It is this. That Miss Bingley sees that her brother is in love with you, but wishes him to marry Georgiana Darcy. I also suspect that his regard has been further suppressed by Mr. Darcy's interference.
You must not criticize Lizzie. Perhaps I have only imagined Mr. Bingley's regard.
She has influenced him, Jane, along with Mr. Darcy.
Surely she only wishes his happiness.
Oh, she may wish many things other than his happiness, such as an increase in wealth, consequence, and great connections.
No, Lizzie, I think no ill of him or his sister. Let me take it in the best light, in the light in which it may be understood. I have at least the comfort that it has only been an error of fancy on my part, and that I have done no harm to anyone but myself.
Really, Jane, you are too good. You think the world respectable. The more I see of the world, the more I am dissatisfied with it. And every day confirms my belief in the inconsistencies of human characters.
You must not hinder your happiness on my behalf.
sisters crossed in love. Next to being married, a girl likes to be crossed in love a little now and then. You will hardly bear to be long outdone by your sister Jane. Here are officers enough in Meryton to disappoint all the young ladies in the country. Let Wickham be your man, for he's a jolly fellow and will jilt you credibly.
I thank you, sir, but a less agreeable man would do better for me. We cannot at all expect Jane's good fortune.
Amazement! Within the very week, and in the shortest time as Mr. Collins's long speeches would allow, all was settled by him and Charlotte Lucas by way of
Domestic arrangement.
And Lizzie feels she accepted him solely from.
The pure and disinterested desire of an establishment.
And as Baba said,
Cared not how the establishment was gained.
Charlotte's marriage is unaccountable, in every degree unaccountable.
My dear Lizzie, you must not give way to such feelings as they will ruin your happiness.
Engaged to Mr. Collins, my dear Charlotte, impossible.
Why should you be so surprised, my dear Eliza? Do you find it impossible that Mr. Collins should be able to procure any woman's good opinion, simply because he was not so happy as to succeed with you?
Certainly not, but 2 offers of marriage in 3 days.
I'm sure when you have had time to think it over, you'll be happy for me. I'm not a romantic, you know. I never was. You must come and visit me at the parsonage as soon as ever you can.
I tell you, we are in a pitiable state. Because of the entail, Charlotte Lucas will be head of the house, and I will have to make my way for her and live to see her take my place in it.
Let us hope for better things. Let us flatter ourselves that I may be the survivor.
In our gloom, Mr. Wickham's society was of material service, and his betrayal by Mr. Darcy was of general knowledge. We all agreed that Mr. Darcy was the worst of men.
The next week, Mr. Gardner and his wife came to collect Jane to take her to London. He is a sensible, gentlemanlike man, and Mrs. Gardner enlivened the premises with the giving of sage advice, the describing of the newest fashions, and the distributing of presents.
a young man such as you describe Mr. Bingley seems to fall in love with the pretty girl for a few weeks and just as easily forgets her. Now, as to Mr. Wickham, whom you mention far too frequently, I would have you be on your guard.
Mr. Wickham will not be in love with me if I have anything to do with it. I am not in love with him, but I do find him to be the most agreeable man of my acquaintance.
And wise.
All I can promise you is not to be in a hurry.
Very well. I shall take Jane with me to London, poor girl, as the chain of scene might be of service. It had better have happened to you, Lizzie. You would have laughed yourself out of it sooner. I understand you are to visit the Collinses in their newly married estate, and you must visit me as well.
As March was to take me to Hunsford Parsonage, the idea of spending a night in London made a plan as perfect as plan could be. Jane!
Lizzie!
Oh, Jane, London looks so agreeable to you.
I confess myself to have been entirely deceived in Miss Bingley's regard for me. She has barely visited me here while in London, and when she did come, it was very evident that she had no pleasure in it. She seemed only to come to convince me of her brother's interest in Miss Darcy.
All gentlemen are held in my lowest repute. It is said that Mr. Wickham is now an admirer of a certain Miss King.
Oh.
Whose most remarkable charm, I might add, seems to be through family mortality of 10,000 pounds. You look pale, Lizzie. Are you ill?
If she does not oppose to it, then why should we?
Her not objecting to it does not justify him.
I have a very poor opinion of young men who live in Hertfordshire, and their friends who live in Derbyshire are not much better. I am sick of them all. Thankfully, I am to go to the Collinses tomorrow, where I shall find a man who has not one agreeable quality. Perhaps stupid men are the only ones worth knowing at all.
Bravo. You must come with Mr. Gardner and myself on a tour of pleasure this summer.
Oh, Aunt, what a delight!
For what are men to rocks and mountains? Every object of my next day's journey was new and interesting. And at length, the parsonage was discernible, and Charlotte and Mr. Collins appeared at the gate.
My dearest Charlotte. Oh, you are welcome and welcome again. Come, you must be wearied and jostled.
I have news of Lady Catherine's delicate consideration in inviting us to dine at Rosings. Do not make yourself uneasy, dear cousin, about your apparel. I am sure Lady Catherine will not think less of you for being simply dressed.
The dinner was, for example, well, and there was every servant and every article of plate, just as Mr. Collins had promised.
You must not be surprised, my dear Eliza, that Mr. Darcy will be in attendance, bringing with him a Colonel Fitzwilliam, younger son of his uncle.
It is my pleasure to introduce Lady Catherine de Bourgh, whose wit, affability, and condescension make her the admired ornament of...
Yes, quite so. You are, I believe, Elizabeth Bennet.
I am.
Your father's estate is entailed on Mr. Collins, I think. For your sake, I am glad of it, but otherwise I see no occasion for entailing estates from the female line. A word, Mr. Collins.
Miss Bennet, I had not hoped to meet you here.
Nor I.
May I present to you Colonel Fitzwilliam?
Your beauty on report exceeds.
This is not the case in all quarters, Colonel Fitzwilliam.
Miss Bennet, your family.
My family.
Have you many sisters, Miss Bennet?
I have 4 sisters.
That is a great many. Are you the eldest?
I am the second.
Are they handsome?
Yes, ma'am.
Do they play and sing? Do you draw?
No, not at all.
What, none of you? That is very strange. Has your governess left you?
We never had a governess.
How was that possible? 5 daughters brought up in a home without a governess? I never heard of such a thing. Your mother must have been quite a slave to education.
Not as much as you might think.
Then who taught you? Who attended you?
Well, we were always encouraged to read, and books were always provided. But one might be idle if they certainly chose to be.
Aye, no doubt. But that is what a governess would prevent. Had I known your mother, I should have advised her most strenuously to engage one. Are any of your younger sisters out?
Oh, yes, ma'am, all.
All? All 5 out at once? Very odd. The younger ones out before the eldest are married.
But I find it very hard upon younger sisters that they should not have their share of amusement in society just because their elder sisters have not the means or inclination to marry early.
Upon my word, you give your opinion very decidedly for so young a person. Pray, what is your age?
With 3 younger sisters out, your ladyship can hardly expect me to own to it.
What is that you are saying, Fitzwilliam? What are you telling Miss Bennet?
We are speaking of music, madam.
Of music? Then pray, speak aloud.
I'm just reminding Miss Elizabeth of her earlier promise to favor us with pianoforte.
Yes. Pray excuse me. I fear you shall not find me a great proficient. Pray, return to your conversation rather than attend me.
I often tell young ladies that no excellence in music is to be acquired without constant practice.
You mean to frighten me, Mr. Darcy, by coming closer, but my courage always mounts with every attempt to intimidate me.
You could not really believe me to entertain any design of alarming you. I've had the pleasure of your acquaintance long enough to know you occasionally like to profess opinions which are in fact not your own.
Your cousin will teach you to not listen to anything I say and give you a pretty notion of me. But take care, sir, for I shall retaliate. Some things may come out of my mouth which will shock your relations to hear.
I am not afraid of you.
Pray, let me hear what you accuse him of. I should like to know how a pardoner acts around strangers.
You shall hear it then. My first time of ever meeting Mr. Darcy was at a ball, and he refused to dance, and there was more than one young lady without a partner.
I had not at the time the honor of knowing any lady in the assembly, and I am ill-qualified to recommend myself to strangers.
Shall we ask a man of sense and education who has lived in the world why he is ill-qualified to recommend himself to strangers?
I have not the talent of conversing well with those I've never seen before.
Thankfully for all those present, that is not the case here. Surprisingly, after our delightful evening at Rosings Park, the two cousins came often of an afternoon to the parsonage. It became evident that Colonel Fitzwilliam enjoyed Charlotte's and my society, but why Mr. Darcy came so often was more difficult to understand.
If you would not laugh me to scorn, I would suggest the possibility that he's being partial to you.
The man hardly meets my eyes, and will sit near me for 10 minutes together without opening his lips.
Ah, but he often looks at you quite appraisingly when you're otherwise engaged.
Stuff. I'm going for a ramble in the park.
Ah, Miss Bennet.
Colonel Fitzwilliam, I did not know you walked this way.
Are you going much further?
No, I should have turned in a moment. Do you indeed leave for Kent on Saturday?
We do. Well, if Darcy doesn't put it off again.
I have never met a man so inclined to putting people off as much as Mr. Darcy.
But so do we all. It just so happens he has better means of having than a great deal of others. And I'm at a service.
I suppose that he likes very much to have people at his service. I wonder he does not marry, so he can secure someone of that profession. But I suppose that his sister will have to do for the present time, since she is under his sole care.
In fact, I'm enjoying with Darcy and guardianship over Miss Darcy.
Indeed.
She's one of the most tractable creatures in the world, and a favorite of Miss Bingley. I believe I heard you say you know her?
A little. Mr. Bingley is a great favorite of Mr. Darcy. He seems to depend on Mr. Darcy quite a lot.
I have reason to believe Bingley very much indebted to Mr. Darcy. A thing that Darcy would wish not to be well known, for if to get round to the lady's family, it would be an unpleasant thing.
You may, of course, depend on my not mentioning it.
All he really told me was he was lately congratulating himself on saving a friend the inconvenience of a marriage. And I can only assume it to be Darcy, as his open character can cause him to get a scrap of sorts.
I beg your pardon, but I do not see how Mr. Darcy has any means in regard to his friend's inclination.
All I remember, there was a very strong objection to the lady's family. One being a country attorney, the other one having some mercantile background, and perhaps an unfit mother. But all these conjectures aside, good day to you, Mrs. Bennet.
To Jane, there can be no objection. All loveliness and goodness as she is. Neither can anything be said against my father, who, with some peculiarities, Mr. Darcy has nothing to disdain against. Of course, my mother. But Mr. Darcy should suffer a greater wound, and is want of his friends' importance of his inclination than of their own sense. And he has been affected by the worst kind of pride, and partly for trying to save Mr. Bingley for his own sister.
Miss Bennet,
Mr. Darcy,
may I... Would it be suitable if I inquired of your health?
my health?
As I've not encountered you these past days, I come to inquire of your health.
My health, Mr. Darcy, meets all the usual standards. Yes.
In vain I have struggled. It will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you. I see I dismay you. I should have declared myself in an earlier date. But there were, of course, the family obstacles which judgment always opposes to inclination. The general sense of your social inferiority, of it being a degradation to the line. I could not forget my responsibility to an estate, a way of life, a pride of place which might, given your circumstances, disinclude you. And thus the very ardency I described took place against my will and reason, or rather in opposition to my strength and inclination. But the very strength of my attachment has made it impossible for me to conquer my feelings. And I can only express a hope that these feelings will now be rewarded by your acceptance of my hand. There. I've spoken ill, but mean well, Miss Bennet.
It is natural that obligation should be felt. and if I could feel gratitude, I would now express it. But I cannot. I have never desired your good opinion, and you have obviously bestowed it most unwillingly. The feelings which you have told me have long resentment and withheld your regard can have very little difficulty in overcoming them after this explanation.
And this is all to which I'm to have the honor of expecting? I might wish to be informed why, with such little endeavor at civility, I am thus rejected.
And I might as well inquire why with so evident a design of offending and insulting me, you chose to tell me that you liked me against your will, your character, and even against your better judgment. Was not this some excuse for incivility if I was uncivil? But I have other provocations, you know I have. Do you think that any offer of your hand would tempt me to accept the man who has ruined, perhaps forever, the happiness of a most beloved sister? You have divided Mr. Bingley and Jane from each other, or perhaps yours was the principal means, and have caused them pain of the acutest kind. Do you deny that you have done it?
I have no wish to deny that I did everything in my power to separate my friend from your sister. But I rejoice in my success. Towards him, I've been kinder than towards myself.
Quite clearly said. But it was not on this instance that my dislike was founded. Your character was unfolded to me in the recital that I received many months ago from Mr. Wickham.
You take an eager interest in that gentleman's concerns.
Knowing his misfortunes, who would not take an interest in him.
His misfortunes?